I think what we need to understand is in the last few days, the extraordinary alarms that have been coming from the World Metropolitan Organization and the IPCC about what danger Britain is now in. And I think that's why the context we need to take this protest into account with. We are now facing, every single city in Britain is facing the danger of a 7-meter wall of water, crashing through us with the current climate extreme. What will it be like by 2050 if we don't cut our emissions? And I think we should be talking about the crisis that the COP is now facing.
Well, are you concerned? We've got Boris Johnson in the papers this morning suggesting that it may not deliver what he was even hoping for.
Yeah, it's terrifying. Basically, the World Meteorological Organization says carbon emissions are now at the highest ever. The UN is warning that we're facing a 16% rise in carbon emissions, and the promises for COP are not going to even deliver what's needed. And what we've seen over the last few years is that governments are not even delivering on the promises they've made. So let's take example the issue you asked me to come on and talk about today, the failure of governments to deliver on their promise to compensate and help poor countries deal with the climate emergency. What is the money that's at stake here? The shortfall is £10 billion, and that's what the row is about, £10 billion. That is 1/10,000th of the global economy. That is how lack of seriousness that the COP is dealing with and governments are dealing with. We are in a major crisis here, and the COP looks like it will fail.
Oh, well, Donncha, I mean, Boris Johnson's not done himself any favours, has he, with his comments? I mean, front pages today on the front of the Metro, you know, they've gone big with the recycling trashed by Boris Johnson. He says recycling's a red herring. What have you made of these comments?
Yeah, well, recycling is an important part of domestic domestic sustainability. But in the wider thing, the real issue is that the COP is failing to cut carbon emissions. If we don't focus on that, this is a side story. It's a small story, but it's a side story. The thing we must focus on is COP must agree carbon emissions to keep us under 1.5. At the moment, that is not looking right. COP must agree to stop destroying the forest. Yesterday, the World Meteorological Organization said 50% of historic carbon emissions have been stored in oceans and forests. This year, the Amazon ceased to do that. Understand the seriousness of that. The Amazon, which helped absorb up to 50% of global emissions, is now becoming a net emitter because we're bulldozing it and we're burning it for meat. This is a key target for COP. We must sign a treaty that protects all existing forests and starts replanting some of the ones we've destroyed.
There's a massive irony here too, because, you know, we've been talking about Insulate Britain. You switch on any radio station, certainly in the London area, their phone-ins are dominated by Insulate Britain. And we're talking about them and a rather small aspect of carbon emissions in insulating homes, taking away from this argument that you think we should be concentrating on. Do you share that frustration?
I share the frustration that we haven't acted. You know, people like me have been calling for insulation in homes for decades. And we had 10 years of absolutely rock bottom interest rates. And what did the government do over the last 10 years? It cut insulation rates by 95% between 2014 and 2019. And what that has left us is vulnerable to global gas prices and leaves 5 to 6 million people having to choose between heat and food. What we are looking here is a failure of government for decades by both Labour and the Tory governments. That's what I'm frustrated about, that millions of people in Britain are choosing between food and heating and adding to climate change.
And listen, you know, before we go, we are running out of time. We just need to just have a look at this picture. You know, again, gracing the, well, one front cover, front of a newspaper today. You know, these are the tactics that are now being used. Activists are gluing themselves to roads. What would you like to say about that?
My heart, these people are desperate. They're looking at the news, they're looking at the science, and they're desperate. And nothing else has worked. We've tried politics, we've tried petitions, we've tried marches, and still the cuts happen to insulation, and nothing happens on global carbon emissions. I would love either of you to tell us what else can the climate movement do.
Well, I'd say watch what happens at Glasgow next week. There's a global conference on this very issue. I mean, there's no more that can be done than that at this stage, is there?
Well, I think for the next week, if the media could call on prioritise three main asks to put pressure on the government to do something constructive at COP. What are the three things? Stop forest destruction. Stop investing in new fossil fuels. Stop investing in new coal, oil and gas. And thirdly, start cutting emissions, promises to cut emissions to 1.5. Those three things as priorities for COP. The media for the next week, pressurise the government to do that. You might actually help do something positive at COP. And I'm asking for your help on that as well, guys.
Welcome to the GB News YouTube channel. You can watch us live 24 hours a day, catch up on your favourite shows and join in the conversation in the comments below.
Don't forget to subscribe and you'll never miss any of our exclusive content.